You will find yourself connecting to Azure portal several times a day and manage the resources here. Now I have connected to portal.azure.com and I can then manage all of these resources that you see on the left hand side. So you can create virtual networks, load balancers, virtual machines, and this list is endless. There are just too many resources that Azure has as of today. You can find out all the resources that Azure has by clicking on All Services. Once you click on it, you will see the world of Azure and you can actually create everything from the top to the bottom. There are hundreds and thousands of resources provided by Microsoft and their partners in the Azure portal. In this video, let's understand what options are available inside the Azure portal. Services is just one of them. You also have this dashboard option. You can create your custom dashboard. So as soon as you log into the Azure portal, what do you want to see? Do you want to see the monitoring status of the virtual machines that were created this week? Do you want to see the billing report per time zone? So administrators usually create a new dashboard by clicking on the dashboard button and then adding these resources to the grid on the right hand side. So I can just click on this add button and then it adds the element on the grid. You can change the time zone from what exists on this block, from this is European standard, and you can change it to whatever you want in this list. Do you want it 24-hour format or 12-hour format? Well, let's add some more resources from the left hand side to the grid. Well, you can say I want to add availability and users and groups in Active Directory, user activity summary, and I also want to know how many resource groups I have. You can drag and drop these elements in the grid to give it a better look and feel, and then just click on Done Customizing. You have your new dashboard created. So as soon as you log in, you can toggle between your custom dashboards. Usually we rename these dashboards to refer it to a particular department or a business unit. Now these elements on the dashboard act as a quick reference point to your resource in Azure. So let's say you want to find out how many users and groups you have in Active Directory. I can just click on it and it takes me right there into the interface. So I do not have to drill down to this particular resource and then identify my resources there, right? So dashboard is a quick reference point to all my resources. On the top right hand side, you can see your user ID that you're logged in with. This one is a feedback button. So anytime you want to give feedback to Microsoft, you can just do that by clicking on this smiley button, write your feedback here and click on submit feedback. There's a help option. So at any point in time you want to know more about Microsoft services, the roadmap as to where Microsoft is going and taking the Azure services. Are there any new public and private preview features being released? Well, these are the hyperlinks that will help us identify that. Settings will help us modify the look and feel of the interface, changing the color, notifications, and how the interface acts and gives you a user experience is all controlled in this settings button, which looks like a gear. The notification will tell us any actions or activities happening in your Azure portal. For instance, if you are creating a virtual machine or a web application or a storage account or restarting a virtual machine, the status of such actions are shown up in the notifications. Then you have this filter option. Organizations usually have multiple directories, and that will happen if the organization has acquired and has more than one organization within them. They will merge those directories into one and keep it in a single unified console. So you can then see those subscriptions right here. You can filter those subscriptions here and manage them from a single unified console. If you would like to manage your resources using Azure PowerShell or with Azure Shell, then you can just click on the Cloud Shell option. Moving forward, in the next video, we will use this Azure Shell and PowerShell to create resources in the cloud. It's just not about creating, but also managing the resources, like let's say restarting a virtual machine adding a new hard disk, or adding additional memory to the virtual machine. Well, these are just few things that I said, but everything can be controlled using Azure Shell as well as the PowerShell. Well, this is just a snapshot of Azure interface, which is portal.azure.com. But as and when we start using this interface, there will be new things that will surface and we will discuss about them.
It's pretty easy to use the portal to create Azure resources, but it is definitely not the most efficient way to provision resources as it requires a lot of pointing and clicking. An alternative is to use the command line interface. Although in the beginning it may sound a little bit difficult because you got to remember the exact names and different syntaxes for the command line options, but once you've mastered it, you can often create and manage resources much more quickly with CLI. Let's go ahead and understand how that is possible. And in this demonstration, I'm going to show you how you can create a web app using the Azure App Services. Now remember that you do not have to install anything on your desktop or download any kind of utility to launch the Azure CLI. As you see, I'm logged on to the Azure portal, and on the top right hand side, there is this icon which launches the Azure CLI for you. If you're doing this for the first time, it may even ask you to create a storage account. So you'll get a pop-up and then you got to click on OK to have that storage account provisioned. It takes a minute to initialize this section. Now as you see that it has initialized and has launched the PowerShell mode in the Azure CLI. You can flip to Azure CLI as well by clicking on the bash option and then click on confirm. And this just tells us that you can use PowerShell as well as bash in the same console. If you're familiar with Linux commands, then this will be really easy. First, we need to download the files for a sample website. I will go ahead and clone a web application which is already available in the Microsoft samples page. For example, I can go ahead and use the git command to clone the repository available in the Microsoft repo page at this following link. Once you hit enter, it will clone it from that URL and store it into your local repository. So if you navigate to the local folder, you will see that a new folder is created with the folder name HTML docs hello world. Let's navigate to that path. Now, if you look at the content of it, you got a sample index.html page on it. Now, using this file, let's go ahead and deploy a web app in Azure. The command to deploy a web app is AZ, which stands for Azure, and then you type the resource name which you want to deploy. In this case, it is a web app. And then this will be followed by up, which means that it will be using the code in the current directory. You then also need to specify the location where it needs to be created. I'm going to use East US in this case. Then you also need to specify the name of the web application. So let's call it as the Great Demo App. Okay. I also want to tell that the HTML file that it needs to look up is index.html. Okay, great. Looks like the website is running. Let's go ahead and verify that. So I'm going to minimize this and then navigate to our App Services section. There we have the app called as Great Demo App. We can click on that, and then here you will find one of the property of the web application, which is the URL. You can just copy that and paste it in the browser. There you go. The first app is created. In the previous sections, you saw how quickly you can create a VM, and now the web app as well. And in both the cases, we deleted the content because you don't want to incur any more charges. So once you're done with the lab, make sure you delete your resource group. What we can do is go to the app here and then click on delete. We can do the same thing that we did for our VM, but what I'm going to do is do the same thing with Azure CLI. So here you can say AZ group stands for the resource group, and the name of the resource group that I want to delete needs to be mentioned here. So delete hyphen name followed by the name of the resource group. So the resource group name is as follows. So I'm going to copy that and paste it here and hit enter. It asks for confirmation to say yes. So while that's being deleted, I should mention that there are many ways to deploy a web app. For example, you saw that you can deploy it using the Azure CLI. You can also deploy it directly by going into the portal. but the developers usually use a Visual Studio Code or Visual Studio or both to publish the app directly into the app service without you needing to use the Azure portal or the CLI. Now, once the app is deployed, you or the developer will then use the portal or the CLI to manage it. Remember that you can deploy any service and manage them using Azure CLI and PowerShell. In this demonstration, I just gave an example of an app service, but then you know that there are tons of services in Azure. All of them can be managed using PowerShell and CLI. That's all for now, folks. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next lesson. It's pretty easy to use the portal to create Azure resources, but it is